Welcome back to Leadership, the Secret Sauce with coaches Dave Lipsky and Matt Dodson, where we are delving into the realms of leadership and coaching. Join us as we sit down with remarkable leaders and coaches. And today we have one uncovering Barry's unique insights and strategies that really truly make him exceptional. We'll explore the question, what is your secret sauce and when and how do you know? Unveiling the hidden ingredients behind his success. Are you ready? And before we begin, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Character Matters Coaching and Consulting, where they believe that your character is the compass guiding you through life's journey. Whether you're facing personal or professional challenges, they are dedicated to helping you discover and strengthen the core values that define who you are. Dave.
Barry, it's so good to have you on the show. We like to start with an energy check in. On a scale from 1 to 10, what is your energy level at this present time?
Yeah, I would say it's an 8. And it's an 8. I do think about energy in coaching, and we're on video and audio right now. I'm standing. And that usually bumps about a 10, 15% increase when I am. So I'm in a good state, well rested, and interested in the conversation.
You know what? I must admit, I'm at a 9.5 today. And the reason is, besides actually getting regular sleep, I've been looking forward to this conversation since Valentine's Day. Actually, my wife has been looking forward to this conversation since Valentine's Day, which is a couple of months now. And yeah, she can't wait to hear what Barry, like, this is an interesting thing. My wife loves listening to what Barry had to say, and then of course my
I,
mother-in-law loves listening to what Dave has to say. So this is all for them.
I love it. I'm interested in the origin story of Valentine's Day, the correlation between love and coaching.
That's right. And love and leadership. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
Barry, what is your secret sauce and how did you learn that?
Yeah, sure. I start with a clinical underpinning. I used to run psychiatric treatment facilities for years. And the origin of my understanding of group dynamics and personal change has to do with that origin, that healthcare. And that you ask about this secret sauce, and I thought a lot about that. And it comes back to alignment, and alignment in terms of values, thoughts, and actions. When those are lined up, the premise, as you probably know at a clinical level, is congruence from Carl Rogers' work and others, that the correlation between that and health is high, and productivity in organizational settings is high. And that is how I do think about coaching and leadership development. And when you can take that alignment and move it not only inside of a person, but across a team, across an organization, across an industry, I do believe it's correlated. I don't think it's esoteric, hopeful, aspirational. I think it's correlated. So when you ask about energy, energy is also not irrelevantly connected to those 3 areas. And especially if others may not agree, meaning going against the grain to be really authentic, not in trite terms. I mean, real, living as you are. And so I start with alignment. I can't miss the clinical underpinning. This is not therapy. It is not clinical work, but the overlaps are there. The Venn diagrams are there, and it's extremely useful, in my opinion and experience, separate from my words, the clients I work with. And I used to not talk about that and put that as a secondary. And the more I got into these, as we know, any of us who is engaged in coaching, these are sacred conversations. They are profound conversations. And people were open and receptive. And the personal side does impact how one leads and one is responsive in coaching. So I start with alignment. It is clinically oriented with an overlap of organizational development.
Barry, how do you get to that place where there's alignment between you as the coach and your client?
Yeah.
I could I see the head angle. I see it. When there's alignment, there's comfort. And when there's comfort and risk is managed, and people aren't so vigilantly worried about how they come across, people take risks. And that to me is connected to change. And so the alignment is an enabler. And to be fair, this is not so deliberate where I set out with this objective at all. Who knew? Who knew? Who grows up to want to be an executive coach? I wanted to be Paul McCartney, not an executive coach. So alignment is, I believe, an enabler to comfort. And in comfort is gut. I have a good friend of mine who said, confidence comes from the gut. And it's another way of saying alignment. And when you have that kind of peace, groundedness, you have people taking risks. Why not? Let me try this. As opposed to the performance oriented zone that a lot of folks get into in corporate settings, based on the nature of that environment, of course. There's a lot of that. Mm-hmm. I think in coaching, our objective is to create a environment where it's essentially comfortable so that we can profoundly push in a way that you can't otherwise. So I often look at those paradoxes. You need calm in order to push, alignment in order to be off alignment to try new behavior. And so that's how I think about, informed by the people I work with. This is not in isolation, obviously. This is based on the people I work with, sponsors, clients, colleagues, in order to test that. And I also like to be wrong, to get to closer and closer approximations to truth. Happy to be. When I discover that's not quite it, that's okay too. I think it's really over time, meaning I'm a huge believer, and probably from my family, from finding my own way in life, of brutally hard work. So I'm against the grain. I know there's a lot of focus on work-life balance, and of course I value that. I have 3 little girls and my love, Lydia, and of course I want to be in a good state of mind. So that is important. However, it's through being tested and doing the things that I'm asking others to do and pushing myself in profound ways. And I believe it's the reps, it's the hard work, it's working purposefully in industries that are not singular. And so I've pushed myself to work in finance and accounting and sports and entertainment and oil and gas and one-on-one startup series A, B, C. And I think that makes you better. I think that gives you those kind of insights. So frankly, I don't think necessarily, for me at least, it's been a framework or an epiphany in a moment. It's been brutally hard work and finding my way, and hopefully the same kind of alignment. And then the epiphanies come, I believe, when you're in that zone. And then testing them. I run it by, I say, here's my premise. When I work with people, I'm very transparent about, this is a working model, hypothesis, premise. What's your reaction? Not good or bad, do you agree? What's your reaction? How does that fit into your current way of looking at the world? So I'm very experience and experiment based. And I have found, at least for myself and colleagues that I really admire and trust, that it's brutally hard work. I know that's not very popular sometimes. Like, that seems too intense, but my experience tells me that it isn't. And that leads us to, more clarity and finding our own path. You have to find your voice, like a performer, a singer, a writer. There's a voice in coaching, and getting clear about what that voice is, I think, is very central to alignment and unearthing these epiphanies that are beautiful. I mean, they're wonderful when they come for both of us, coach and coachee, sometimes simultaneously.
Yeah. And how did you discover that? How did you unearth that connection?
Mm-hmm. I would say in some ways the opposite. It's non-thought, like a golf swing or tennis, where yes, be intentional and deliberate, and then stop and be open. And so more like a Bob Dylan line, like pay attention to coincidences. And when I think about my own development, Glenda Boyd, who is a forensic psychologist out in the world, who's a phenomenal human being and intelligent and insightful, was the one that identified when I was running the clinic. She was an intern, and she said, you're going to run your own business. And I said, I'm not. And you're going to be a coach. I said, I don't even know what that is. And so she saw in me the qualities of understanding team dynamics around the group I was working and the coaching that I couldn't see for myself. And she encouraged me to apply for a position that I would never have. And so it's about, I think, less the deliberate thinking. Why? Because I see people get stuck in cul-de-sacs all the time. I spoke with somebody earlier today, brilliant, brilliant in finance, stuck in cul-de-sacs and gets immobilized. So I think in some ways it's back to that central theme about alignment, and there is some trust and leap with people you trust. And when I think about my life, both personally and professionally, they have been seemingly random events of connection with people that are highly trusted, that had my best interest in mind, much like we all do in assessing and poaching and developing people. That was as important as anything. It was less thinking and it was more being receptive. And it's also, I'm a big believer in being stuck, angry, irritated, and paying attention to that. What is leading you off path? And look for those. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. I'm a big believer in that. So I would say mostly pay attention to where you're irritated, where you're frustrated, where you're angry. And that to me is as informative as the syllogistic reasoning of A is to B, B is to C, therefore, and I'll pursue this kind of coaching. Of course, that gets you someplace. And I don't imply that that's not fruitful. It is for lots of people. I have seen a different path, not just for myself, for others, being open, listening, trusting, and listening for those cues, and then taking the leap. That's back to the risk taking where I'm willing to try it, where I wouldn't have otherwise. And that's where I think coaches become a guide, a support, a trial mechanism. So I think it's less thinking, more open, and pay attention to physicality. What do you notice in your body, in your thinking, in your sleeping? Why can't I sleep, for example, and let that guide decision points? I'm a big believer in that at this moment, in my practice and career.
Barry, what did you bring over from your clinical practice to your coaching practice?
Probably measurement. So we were measuring symptom management. Somebody who has schizophrenia, does that person have, by frequency, duration, and fear level, delusions or paranoid ideation? And our measurement was on the risk mitigation of that happening to prevent somebody from getting hospitalized. High cost, high trauma. And the measurement, of course, in organizational settings is not that. Once in a while, it is. And I can't say enough. Mental health is an important, transparent discussion these days compared to 20 years ago, and that's good. But it still doesn't come out where a lot of leaders that I work with, highly, highly capable human beings, are struggling a lot. So you can't ignore that. But I think the measurement in corporations and startups and so on is, of course, P&L, performance, revenue, EBITDA. How are the correlations between leadership behavior linked to those outcomes? And can we, with a confidence interval, make an assertion that in 95% likelihood that it is connected? That's very different. That's not as much risk mitigation on a personal level. It's performance, it's product. Those are different. So I think that's one that changed. And then the relationships, I suppose that's important also in healthcare, but the relationships with the Matts of the world, the Coach Lipskis of the world, and working in different organizations are really important to build a level of real trust and credibility in order to enable this kind of work in the first place. And a non-marketing based practice that has nothing to do with telling anybody anything, and it only being relationship based. So I think the measurement changed, if that makes sense, and that's probably primary. And then the relationships and how important those are in partnering with people, and how satisfying they are too. I don't know if you had similar experiences, but those are a couple of things that come to mind when I think about, well, what's different in that case?
Yeah. Mm. This is, it just makes me think of, I, well, um, in talking about our youth, like what would you have told the younger Barry Shapiro coach that was first starting
Yes.
out that you think,
Yes.
hey, look, this would be really important for you to actually, you know, I hate the word lean into, but I mean, that's kind of
Yes.
like, what would you try or what would you tell them? Like, hey, spend some time thinking about this.
Yes. Yes. What a shift. I mean, yeah. Well,
Mm,
well, in that cookie example, it's a great point. Here, a case in point.
yeah.
There are two schools of thought I find around a coach working with a team broadly,
Mm,
meaning a coach coaching more than one person. And one school of thought is that should not happen, that it should be isolated and siloed appropriately, where Coach A works with Executive A and Coach B works with Executive B, and there's some overlap in general theme sharing. However,
mm,
if you can create a situation where there's profound, measurable trust, you can coach several people at a time and become what I know you know
mm,
about this concept of team coach, which in my experience is exponentially more effective. However, it's higher risk and needs to be managed a lot more so.
yeah.
And the trust needs to be, much higher in that regard. So, but you can't do that or anything resembling that unless there is this trust, and why I point to it. So, and I'm so fascinated by different models of coaching: dyad coaching, triad coaching, team coaching. All of those, of course, require trust. Again, beyond esoteric, but where it's solid.
Yeah. I would especially say, like, in the prevalence now of internal coaching as a practice, that's what we've heard just from people's perspective. Like, hey, look, um, maybe 5 years ago you wouldn't have said, "Oh no, we trust our internal coaches." It was a lot more discussion around, ooh, are they going to hear information they shouldn't be hearing, and where is that going to go, and where are they going to move on to, and after they're and now, a discussion that I just had last week was, hey, we trust implicitly our internal coaches. Should we get rid of our external provider? Yeah. Who would have ever thought that that would be possible? Now, I always advocate for a mosaic of coaching, which would have, based upon really of the need and the question, I think that we've even talked about, Barry, is can this person trust whomever they're going to talk to? If that's not there, let's just split up the cookies and go home. Um, One of the questions that we like to ask is of our coaches, what would you want from a coach? Like, you're no longer giving it, now you're receiving it. What do you want from that coach?
Yeah. Partnership. I like the banter. Coach Lipsky and I making a Long Island connection. That matters, right? The thumbs up. Matt and Barry in our partnership over time. Those kind of partnership comfort is definitely important. I hear a lot that I don't need validation. And I hear that from the highest levels of executives all day long. Guess what? when it really comes down to it, you have the conversations, they say little bit, I need it. And you know what? It is a human need to validate not only that you're good per se, but a validation of a testing, like an experiment, that it's working, you're on the right path. I think it does matter, and not out of insecurity or dependency in any way, shape, or form. I do think that matters, and that is important also. Again, it may be a bit against the grain. I don't need that. This is really behaviorally oriented only, and I don't believe that. I don't think that's the best correlation. And provocation. I love provocation. I love being provoked into challenging my premises and assumptions. I love references to NYU if I was on the West Coast. And I love references to industries that have nothing to do with oil and gas or electronics or technology. I like that. I like different countries. I like learning about what's happening in Nigeria and Jakarta. And I think that makes me better. So I like that. And if there's trust, I do like being wrong to find out how to think differently. So I definitely want that partnership. Dave, I'm glad you said that about energy. What is it? Nothing great ever happened without enthusiasm. Right. The energy does matter and it does create and enable change. So I want that level. I don't want a Rogerian clinician in front of me, even though that's my belief around the structure that enables a change, but I don't want passivity. And I don't only want to be guided with my own thinking. I want somebody who's got a wealth of experience and periodically direct recommendations. And I find that the higher up I go in the folks that I work with, they want that. And that's not a pathology, that's not really good coaching. Again, I do not agree with that. I think you need both. But great coaches have an opinion. And I call it sometimes ether coaching. There is a certain type that is, in my opinion, way too passive and way too neutral and way too clinical in that regard. I do not think that's most helpful. I think iron sharpens iron. And I think strong opinions are good for creativity and innovation. So I want to be pushed. I want to be challenged. I want to be validated. I like that, the variation, like rhythmically, the variation in that. I don't want it always the same either. Exactly. So I like the references that both of you have, even in our initial conversations. I like that. I like that in the work that I do or in the coaching that I receive.
And it sounds like you really want a coach that understands enough of when to actually just say, hey, I'm going to just straight up tell you how it is.
Yes. Yes. Or from their perspective, of course, nobody has ultimate truth here, but sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Barry, what advice would you give to new coaches?
Take the focus off yourself. Coaching at its best is swimming. You are fully immersed in the experience of enabling and facilitating another person's direction. Now, you'll hear me say both things. It's both directive and facilitative. But I find that people get most nervous, any of us, myself included, where it's performative and it's vigilant self-assessment. How am I doing? Ooh, how did that land? Was that, ooh, oh, gee, and to get out of the way. Start asking. David Peterson is so effective, in my opinion. He was somebody that I had an opportunity to partner with a little bit in my own development. And he's so accomplished and effective and simple. And he'll have a session where for an hour, he'll ask, what's important to you? Why? How's that changed? What's the meaning? Why is that part important? That's all he does. And it's one of the most profound, non-coach focused conversations around which you can't get nervous. It's all about the other person. So take the spotlight off yourself. The vigilance is way too high. The thinking is way too deep. And the focus and all of that vigilance is in service of another person. Good. Those are great qualities, in my opinion, misdirected. And they're there to serve the other person. They're not there to make you a better coach. They're there to be in service of enabling great outcomes from the other. So I think it's immediately get out, selflessly. Easier said than done. But for new coaches, I find when I work with them, that is a chief complaint. I'm so worried about doing it wrong. And for, the stakes are high. They're not crazy. But that, I don't think that makes it better. So get out of yourself. What's important to you? What do you care about? Where's your energy? Back to the question you asked at the beginning. How's it increase or decrease? Something like that. I'm curious about what you guys do also in that regard.
And I would, just to add on to that, like I would expect a coach to ask themselves that question either before the session or at another point in time, like, hey, do the work, do the
Yes.
introspection work if you want to show up really, just to be able to ask those questions like Peterson asks. right? Why is that
Yes.
important?
Yeah, I love that. It's such a good point because, of course, it's so
Yeah.
much work for us and for getting our own coaches or
Mm,
counselors or guidance or mentor. Absolutely. That's the working out before
yeah.
the performance. But that's such a good point that it is, in some ways, it's another paradox. It's all about us, so it can be nothing about us. So that we're in these good optimal states, and all of us have that to work. I like that frame.
Barry, what are three resources you would recommend?
The first one that was so helpful for me, and I mentioned David Peterson, Mary D. Hicks is a partner years ago that wrote together, and those are my formative years of development in the work they did through or at the time of PDI, Personnel Decisions International. Why this book, Leader as Coach, that is old, sort of like Beethoven. Beethoven's old and dead, and it's really good still. And Leader as Coach to me is such a fundamental, simple set of frameworks that I do think give you the freedom to coach. Some new coaches don't have any reference points. I didn't have any reference point. Where do you start? They have a gaps grid, basically a goal from here to there, and what the gap is and how you close the gap. Really fundamental, simple guidance. I found that very, very useful. Number one. Number two, Susan Cain wrote Quiet, as you may know, the book really about leadership by introverts. And I find that I work with a lot of introverts in engineering and finance and science, and they get incorrectly assessed wrong about how effective they are because they are not out front. And I find that book is very useful. The research references, the guidance, the cultural, gender, and other adaptations, very useful. And then the third, a little different, Night by Elie Wiesel, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Now, why in the world would I call that out? How in the world is that about coaching? It's not. What it calls to, as you probably know, those are books about one of the most horrific human experiences ever documented in the course of human history, the Holocaust. Why does that matter? We live in an insane world. And we live with brutality in so many different ways and so much chaos that that is the backdrop of the worlds people live in. And people are moving through at a corporate level, make no mistake, we all know that. They're brutal. They're not just a job and brutal. And the reference point for a coach to go deep is read a book, whether it's this or something else. It goes deep about something that is way beyond an affiliation, association, a technique, a framework, a humanity. And the best coaches that are worth their salt and are profound and enable real outcomes, I think, go way deep. And so when you ask that question, I go to a place that I didn't think that why would, but that's why. Get experience with how human beings overcome unthinkable adversity because it's all relative. You don't have to go through horrific events. It's all relative to whatever you've experienced previously. And so having some knowledge about general human thematic overcoming, I think matters a lot. So I go to that extreme and I like to read books that are not just coaching or business books per se. I think it makes you better. Just like it makes you better in working with lots of industries, lots of genders, lots of differences. So two coaching, it's like two turntables and a microphone or something, two coaching books and something different, something that is human oriented and not per se coaching, but about overcoming and transcending, which I think is central to coaching. Great coaching.
So Barry, now's the time that Dave and I just have an opportunity
Of
just to kind of
course.
reflect on what
Thanks for
you
asking.
have to say, had to
Thanks for
say,
asking.
even while you're in the room. So, Dave, what's your thoughts? So,
Barry, in reflection, I really like how you don't shield the client from the deeper work that they really need to do to move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I think you're interpreting similarly to how I think. I appreciate the interpretation. Right. Life is dukkha. Life is suffering. And these, these are brutal experiences. I think that's one of the biggest surprises I had in working with our colleagues and leaders when they tell you, and the guards are down and they're not BSing and they're not performing, and you get to a human level. Of course it's that. How could it not be that? And I get worried when it's not that. I get a little skeptical. That's my own bias. Thank you for calling that out.
Yeah. I think that's actually one, Barry. I can hear that that you've asked questions of yourself, and I think that's probably why I think it seems so important. And I think you've always, as long as I've known you for the last 10 years, been very generous in offering, like, hey, if you want to spend some time, I can
Yes.
hear that. And I think in spending the time to like ask yourself the questions, it makes it so much easier for whoever that leader happens to be to really build the trust. Because when you ask it, you've asked it of yourself, and then they don't have to. It just rings more true than hollow. Like, oh, I'm just asking you an academic question, or I memorized the
Yes.
killer questions of coaching, and I'm gonna go down the list because they can smell it. They can smell hollow, or they can sense that. And I think that was the big thing for me. Also, the way you talk about what you have read is a very natural form for people, and I think that's just your the way you show up. Like, hey, here's this, and I would be curious. I'm gonna go check out Peterson. Yeah, who did he write with? What was that? Yeah, and that would inspire if I was a reader, or if I was just curious. Like, hey, okay,
Yeah.
I wanna read Leader as Coach from way back then to see how they did it. Just like I read like a change management book by Daryl Connor, like his original book, and he was talking about sending memos around the office. I was like, is that how they did it before email?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time. We really, really appreciate it. And for those of you that are listening, if you ever want to check out more of Barry, he actually his website is Barry Shapiro now, and .com, and you're based in Colorado, right? But available anywhere in the world.
Anywhere. Travel.
Yeah. Yes. And Dave, you want to give us our last shameless plug from our sponsor?
Are you feeling stuck or overwhelmed? Character Matters Coaching and Consulting provides leadership coaching and consulting to empower you to overcome obstacles and reach your full potential. Visit charactermatters.us.com to learn more about the transformative coaching and how to get connected to Matt for your organization.
Hey, wonderful. Great job.
Thank you,
Dave.
both.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you,
Barry,
much
for joining us. We really appreciate it. And we love spending the time with you.